Maya, what do you think life was like for a farmer in the American heartland at the turn of the 20th century?
Personally, I only identify as characters from the Gilded Age around that time, living in New York City, but I would assume that they're working from dusk till dawn, planting, harvesting, doing backbreaking labor.
Yes, all of that, especially Gilded Age. But it was also something else. It was profoundly isolating on the farm. Most Americans living on the countryside, their world was just a few miles wide. The nearest town could be a full day's journey away. And with that isolation also came an information void.
You're talking about time before radio, before television. So if you were living on a farm in Georgia, you weren't hearing what was happening in Washington, D.C. You weren't getting a daily newspaper or receiving letters from family or friends who moved away. You were cut off.
And that made you an easy target. Farmers were often exploited by predatory companies, forced to accept low prices for their crops and pay exorbitant rates for supplies because they had no way of knowing the market.
The whole system was stacked against them. But it was about to change. Not with a massive political speech or a dramatic scientific discovery, but with a single idea: rural free delivery.
Today, we're unpacking the quiet but complete transformation that turned the isolated countryside into a connected nation. It's a story of political brawls, of technological leaps, and of the ordinary men and women who fought for one simple, radical idea: that every American, no matter where they lived, deserved to be connected. Act 1: The Battle for the Public Good. All right, Maya, let's set the scene. Picture a farm in Ohio, maybe the year 1885. It's early morning, the sun, it's just coming up. You've been working for hours already. You're isolated, the nearest neighbor is a mile away, and the nearest town is maybe 7 miles away.
Oh my gosh, I'm already tired. I don't even hike that long when I want to hike sometimes. And I haven't even thought about the roads. They're muddy in the spring, frozen in the winter, dusty as hell in the summer. 7 miles in a horse-drawn wagon? That's not just a quick coffee run.
I'm thinking about all the bouncing, too, in the horse-drawn wagon. It was a commitment. And to make that trip, all you're doing is checking to see if a letter came in, or to get the latest news, which, by the way, is a week old at that point. It's wild to think about a world so disconnected. A farmer was practically operating in a vacuum. They had no idea what was happening in the world beyond their land. They had no idea what the price of corn was in the next county over, let alone Chicago. They were just waiting.
It set up a huge power imbalance. The big railroad companies, the merchants in the city, they had all the information, but the farmers had none of it. They were ripe for exploitation, and they knew it. To put it simply, a farmer's entire livelihood depended on forces they couldn't see and couldn't control. You've spent a year working in the fields, growing a massive crop of wheat. You've got it loaded up and ready to go, but you have no way of knowing if the price the local merchant offers you is fair. You're completely in the dark. The city merchants and the railroad companies had real-time access to market prices from their, air quotes, big cities like Chicago or New York. They knew if a drought was going to drive up the price, or if a large crop yield was going to send prices plummeting. You just had to take their word for it, because what other choice did you have? You couldn't just drive your entire harvest to Chicago, and the railroad companies had a monopoly on transportation. They charged whatever they wanted to ship your goods. This lack of information and lack of options made them vulnerable to every middleman in the supply chain. The farmers were trapped in a system designed to exploit their labor.
So they decided to do something about it. They organized an attempt to level the playing field. This wasn't some big tech billionaire disrupting an industry. This was grassroots, baby. We're talking about neighbors talking to neighbors, coming together to build power and trust in the community. Grassroots organizing is about people working together to focus the government and politicians to work for them, not the other way around. The Grange, a national farmers organization, they rose up. They weren't about to stand for it anymore. And they had one radical, simple idea: rural free delivery.
And a radical idea it was. The Grange and people living in rural areas launched a massive, decades long political campaign to get the post office to come to them. And their argument? If the government could deliver mail to city folks' homes who, by the way, were already close to everything and therefore not as vulnerable to lack of information as people living in rural areas were, then the government had a democratic obligation to serve everyone equally. Their argument was, why should cities have this new, quote unquote, fancy mail service delivering to people's homes while the old colonial system still prevailed in country districts?
The idea itself was pure populism, but the debate was anything but simple. This wasn't a polite discussion. This was a high stakes showdown. A clash fought not just in the halls of Congress, but in tiny rural community centers, in backwoods saloons. And the opposition was intense. They had two main fronts.
First, you had the private express companies. Think of them like FedEx and UPS of their day. But they were way more ruthless. They had a near monopoly on shipping goods to the countryside because they charged whatever they wanted. The idea of a public service that would ship goods cheaply, that was a direct attack on their bottom line. So they spent a fortune lobbying Congress. They argued that the government shouldn't be competing with private enterprises. It's like today when private prison companies lobby against criminal justice reform.
Wow, so the express companies feared a government service that delivered more for less. And the prisons fear a government service that simply needs less of their quote unquote product. They're literally lobbying against decriminalization and shorter sentences to protect their profits. But back to a slightly simpler time, you could practically hear the private express companies' lobbyists now. Why should the government get into the business of delivering packages? What's next? Mail order houses? Come on.
I mean, I did just see like an entire foyer being on the back of a truck bed going down the highway. So you never know. Never say never. But you did have local merchants and the general store owners. This was a classic Main Street versus big corporation battle. These guys were more than just shopkeepers. They were the community hub. They were the original social network. People came in to grab supplies, but they stayed to gossip, share news, and catch up with each other. These shopkeepers were terrified that if rural free delivery came in, their businesses would dry up and that their community's social fabric would unravel.
And that's a real concern. If I'm on anyone's side but the farmers here, I understand the small shopkeepers. So the battle lines are drawn. On one side, you have the Grange, the organized farmers demanding a public good, a service that would bring equality and access to everyone, no matter how remote. And on the other side, you have a powerful alliance of private express companies and local merchants arguing for the old ways, for a system based on profit and tradition.
And the Grange wasn't backing down. They wrote petitions. They held meetings. They used their sheer numbers to put political pressure on their representatives. It was grassroots advocacy at its best. It proved that a united citizenry could stand up to corporate power and fundamentally reshape the role government has in their daily lives.
So picture a Grange Hall in the 1890s, a kerosene light, a sheet of paper on the table that says, "Petition for rural free delivery, sign here." So families would line up. They spent all day in the fields. They'll spend a night on signatures because one route often required about 100 households demanding it by name, one by one, to pry open a door in Washington.
They didn't just sign one petition, they had to get signatures over and over. When the road washed out, they formed a road committee. When the postmaster refused a route because of the mud, they held a meeting. When Congress stalled, they sent another stack of petitions. Rural advocacy was persistent, a steady drum against the Capitol door, saying, "Treat us like citizens, finish the route."
It's so incredible when you think about it. This was a movement powered by farmers who worked from sunup to sundown and still found time to organize, not just some polished lobbying effort from a corporate office building. Every member of the community signed, the farmers, their wives, their kids, and they would flood their representative's office with these petitions. They were a political force to be reckoned with, and their message was simple and powerful. We are a vital part of this community, and we deserve the same services as everyone else.
And guess what? It worked. Their sheer persistence, combined with the growing political influence of rural America, got the attention of people in power. The biggest champion of all was Postmaster General William L. Wilson, a man who had seen the struggles of rural life firsthand. He understood that the people's demand wasn't just a whim, it was a desperate need. So even though Congress was slow to act, Wilson took a massive risk. He launched a series of experimental rural free delivery routes in West Virginia.
And it was a game changer. Wilson used this success to convince Congress to give them official funding in 1896. He said, and I quote, "It is not a question of an increase of facilities, but of a new civilization." End quote. Another person who deserves credit here is Postmaster General John Wanamaker, who pushed for rule-free delivery the hardest, but left office before it began.
The fierce political battle for rural free delivery fought not only in the halls of Congress, but in local communities and within the Postal Department itself, reveals that the post office was not a static entity, but a dynamic battleground reflecting broader national tensions. Public good versus private profit, federal spending versus fiscal conservatism, and rural power versus urban influence.
So let's get into what that means. You had a bunch of politicians in Washington who saw the cost of setting up these rural routes as a huge, irresponsible use of taxpayer money. They argued the government's role should be limited and that this was a financially reckless idea. The farmers and their allies, meanwhile, were demanding that the government spend money on them, not just the city areas that already had robust services.
And that gets to the final point: rural power versus urban influence. Urban areas already had easy access, but rural America was largely ignored. The Grange's lobbying effort was a forceful demand for equal treatment. It was a clear message that rural Americans were a powerful force and deserved to be connected just like everyone else. The victory for rural free delivery was a landmark win for the countryside, proving they could mobilize and force a government to work for them.
It was a complete revolution. A public institution was about to transform the physical and economic landscape of the country, and the American people were ready to embrace it.
So think about what that actually meant on the ground. A farmer in rural Kansas could now order a catalog, receive it at their door, place an order from that catalog, and have goods shipped to them directly, all without having to travel to town. They could stay informed with daily newspapers, and they could participate in the economy in ways that were impossible before.
It's really hard to imagine living in this world today of the internet and getting a package delivered hours after you order it to your
Mhm.
doorstep instantly. But
Yeah.
this is such a game changer back then.
Mhm.
And that access, that's what makes it democratic. Democracy isn't just about voting, it's about having equal access to information, to markets, to opportunity. When rural Americans were cut off from the mail, they were cut off from participating fully in American life. Rural free delivery changed that. It said that every citizen, no matter where they live, deserves the same service.
And what they built was a tool for democracy, a public service that leveled the playing field and created a new kind of power for ordinary citizens. This wasn't just a postal service, it was the backbone of a new American experiment. And the most bizarre, incredible parts were still to come. And honestly, I, literally this week, overnighted a high visibility dog vest so that I could take my dog to a construction site that I work at. And you know what? I don't know what I'd do if I didn't have that kind of power, you know?
And what will your coworkers would have done? Not being able to see those cute little doggies every day.
It was so cute. Act 2: The Unseen Revolution.
So Congress finally says yes. Rural free delivery is a go. The farmers want a political revolution for the ages. But as with all plans from DC, the reality on the ground was a little bit messier.
Just a little bit? I mean, I can picture it. You got these brand new postal carriers heading out on their routes for the first time, and they're probably thinking, okay, easy day, just gonna roll down this road, drop off some mail, maybe get a thank you from a grateful farmer, and then they hit mile 1.
And what they hit isn't necessarily a road, it's a cow path, a series of deep, muddy ruts. And they're trying to move the mail on these routes that no one in their right mind would have used before. We're talking about roads that were impassable for weeks at a time when it rained. So thick it would swallow a wagon wheel whole. A little rain would turn an entire delivery route into an obstacle course.
So, when you buy a beautiful piece of IKEA furniture and you open the box and the instructions are just like two teeny tiny pictures? Rural free delivery was the Postmaster General's beautiful Swedish shelving unit. And those early carriers were the poor saps trying to assemble it with like a bent spoon and no wrench. And the roads were made of angry oatmeal. They were battling nature itself to deliver.
The farmers had a new, tangible stake in their local infrastructure. For years, they had been reluctant to support taxes for road improvements. I mean, why would you pay for a road that you barely used? But now, if the carrier couldn't get to you, your connection to the world was cut. The mail service became the single biggest motivator for the Good Roads movement, a nationwide effort to create a network of reliable, all weather roads for the first time in American history. As we've talked about in previous episodes, these new roads were often at the expense of older pathways, including long-standing indigenous trail networks that settlers had already appropriated, renamed, and regraded, and violently at that.
So the mail carrier became an unofficial federal lobbyist for better roads. It was a domino effect. The post office didn't just deliver the mail, it had laid the groundwork for modern American infrastructure. The post office becomes this universal symbol of connection, and its challenges become the whole country's challenges. It's a beautiful and I'd argue very American thing to demand that the federal government fix your road so you can get a letter. The struggle to deliver that one envelope across a muddy rut became the original blueprint for every interstate, every highway, and every paved road in the country. The path to the American highway was truly paved one postcard at a time.
And what were those letters bringing? More than just news. The post office was about to unleash a new force that would totally upend rural life. A force that came in the form of a book. A very, very thick book.
And by that book, we're talking about the mail order catalog. Before rural free delivery, the only way a farm could shop was at the local general store. Their inventory was limited to whatever the store owner could get their hands on, and prices were non negotiable. It was a total monopoly.
But then these catalogs started showing up. The Sears Roebuck catalog, the Montgomery Ward catalog. And these things were beasts, hundreds of pages long, filled with everything you could imagine, from farm equipment to clothing, from jewelry to, well, even a whole house. You could literally order a kit home from Sears. It's like the 1900s version of ordering a prefab tiny home from Amazon. Actually, the house I'm sitting in now and my house in Columbus, Ohio is a Sears house, ordered over 100 years ago and mostly still fully functional.
And to be completely frank, I am obsessed with this. The fact that you can go house shopping by looking through a magazine. This was the original online shopping before online. You just sat at your kitchen table and this portal to the outside world opened up. You didn't just see a picture of a new stove. You saw a world of possibilities. You could compare prices. You had choices. It was like the internet, but in paper form, and it came to you in the mail. And because of the post office's universal service, you didn't just get a catalog, you knew it was delivered by the same government service as the president's mail. It broke the isolation and gave people the opportunity to participate in the national economy.
But there was a catch. Rural free delivery had a strict weight limit on parcels, usually just 4 pounds. So while you could order a beautiful new pair of shoes from the catalog, you couldn't get a new plow or a washing machine. The mail order companies were making a killing on the small items. But the big money, the big packages, They were being handled by private express companies at sky high rates.
So the post office was doing all the legwork, connecting the farmers, laying the groundwork for a consumer revolution, but it was being blocked from the big profits. The private companies were just sitting back and waiting for the mail order companies to do the marketing for them, and then they'd swoop in and deliver the big profitable packages. It's the exact same game they play today.
This is a fundamental public subsidy of private commerce. I might even dare to say it's an exploitation of a public good. But breaking it down, because this is the key to everything, and we will come back to this in other episodes, back in the early 1900s, the private express companies, the Atom Express companies, Wells Fargo, they had a genius and devious business model. They would never spend a single penny on market creation for a rural customer. They didn't need to. Why? Because the post office was doing all of the heavy lifting that generated their entire business.
Oh, the catalogs?
Exactly. Before rural free delivery, how could a farmer in the middle of nowhere even know about new products? They didn't. They were entirely reliant on the local general store. But once rural free delivery was a go, the post office, through its new rural network, was delivering these enormous, beautiful, hundreds of pages long catalog from places like Sears, Roebuck, and Montgomery Ward to every farmhouse in America. They were the primary engine of demand. They created the desire. They showed the farmer the brand new plow, the wife the brand new dress, the kids the latest toy. So, yes, capitalism, but at least equal access to capitalism as the rest of the country. When the farmer wanted to order that new item, the catalog companies had to ship it using private express companies because of that weight limit.
Mm.
And that gave them millions of new high margin customers the government created for free.
And the reason the post office couldn't ship the profitable item was because Congress had capped the mail limit at £4 for decades, effectively hamstringing its own service. They were mandated to carry all the cost of serving every isolated location, but legally prohibited from earning the revenue. The bulk profit is always in shipping heavy freight, not in shipping lightweight correspondence.
Exactly. That £4 weight limit was a barrier. It was the gate that kept the post office from serving the public in a complete way. It meant that while the post office could handle a letter or a small box of, say, buttons, the truly profitable packages, a whole kitchen stove, a washing machine, a new set of tools, that had to go to the private express companies. The express companies did zero of the work to create a customer. They didn't build the routes. They didn't advertise. They didn't take on the financial risk of spending millions on catalogs. They just showed up at the Sears warehouse, picked up the big, high profit item that the catalogs had already sold, and they made a killing. They were free riding on the post office's infrastructure and marketing efforts. It was a perfectly designed system of public investment for private gain, and it worked. Act 3. The Human Cargo. The post office is a force in motion. It has rule free delivery, the catalogs, and the private express companies free riding on its success. But there was one missing piece of the puzzle: the ability to ship a decent size package.
Right. Because they've got the delivery network in place, but they still have that measly £4 weight limit on packages. And that's enough for a book and maybe like a small box of chocolates or a pair of shoes, but not much else. It was a massive roadblock for the mail order giants, and it was a continued pain for rural Americans.
It took the post office almost 2 decades to get the next big thing approved by Congress. Rule free delivery happened in 1896, and parcel post didn't go into effect until 1913. That's a 17-year gap. So the question is, what took so long?
Was this still the local merchants fighting against it? Like, did they still think that they could win?
Oh, absolutely. But it wasn't just them. It was the same cast of characters. But the real power was with the massive private express companies. The local merchants were just the ones out on the front lines. They saw the mail order catalogs luring away their customers, and parcel post felt like the final nail in the coffin. But for local merchants, this wasn't just about creeping socialism, as it was called by the lobbyists. It was about their family business. They argued that if the government was allowed to ship packages, it would put them all out of business and turn their towns into ghost towns. So they really saw it as fighting for their survival.
Nice. The socialism boogeyman from the private express companies. And you can see why the local merchants felt that way. They were in an impossible position, caught between a national government backed service and the giant mail order corporations that were now taking all of their business. They were the little guys, and they were fighting a losing battle. The real fight was being waged in Washington by the private express companies, the big railroad corporations, and the powerful lobbyists who were terrified of losing their monopoly on package delivery.
The private express companies were, of course, the most vocal opponents. They argued that the post office was too big, too bureaucratic, and too slow to handle the logistics of shipping packages. They said it would be a financial disaster, that the postal network could collapse under the weight of all of those packages. But their real fear was that a government subsidized service would cut into their profits on big, money making shipments.
So, for 17 years, the people wanted parcel post. The mail order companies wanted it. But the post office was held up by the same powerful, self interested groups.
But eventually, the public demand and the relentless advocacy from the Grange won out. In 1913, Parcel Post was born. It was allowed to mail packages up to 11 pounds, a whopping 11 pounds. The post office was finally in the package business.
Parcel post wasn't just a new service, it was a fundamental shift. For the first time, a farmer could receive and send packages directly without having to go through a local merchant or a private express company.
This changed the economic playing field. The catalogs were already a window. Parcel Post made it an open door. The system started with 11-pound weight limit in 1913, but that escalated quickly. By August of the same year, packages going shorter distances could weigh up to 20 pounds. In 1914, those nearby shipments jumped to 50 pounds, with limits climbing again through the late 1910s and reaching 70 pounds by 1931. Distance mattered. The farther you sent a package, the lower the weight limit and the higher the cost. But for most Americans ordering from regional warehouses or nearby distribution centers, these expanding limits meant you could suddenly receive medium weight gear through the mail: cream separators, sewing machines, pump assemblies, and lots of replacement parts. The truly heavy stuff, like a cast iron stove, still traveled by rail to the nearest depot. Sellers often split big orders strategically: lighter parts by post office, the heaviest piece by rail. So one purchase arrived through a mix of post and rail.
And the mail order companies benefited from a nationwide delivery network that was affordable and reliable. We're talking about the post office directly fueling the creation of our modern consumer economy. It was the original e commerce. It meant that a family in the middle of nowhere could order the same goods as someone in the middle of a big city. And that connected the country in a brand new way.
And the American public, they immediately began to test the limits of what a package could be. And I mean, they tested the limits in ways no one could have ever predicted. In January of 1913, just a few weeks after Parcel Post started, a family in Ohio decided they wanted to mail their infant son, James, to his grandmother's house about a mile away.
I'm sorry. Rewind. A baby in the mail? Because what?
It sounds crazy, but it happened. He weighed just under 11 pounds. They paid 15 cents in stamps, and they handed him off to the local rural carrier. He was delivered safely. It was not a joke, and it was far from a one-off incident. A few weeks later, a 5-year-old named Charlotte was mailed by her parents in Grangeville, Idaho, to her grandparents in Lewiston, 73 miles away, because postage was cheaper than a train ticket. She was too heavy, about 48 pounds, so her parents paid the fare of 53 cents in stamps, and she was chaperoned by the railroad post clerk. Her parents apparently taped a card to her coat that said, "Fragile."
I'm sorry. I can't imagine a postal clerk becoming like the stork. I'm just picturing a postal carrier holding up a baby and going, "Special delivery."
Literally. But it gets better. People didn't just mail kids. They mailed other bizarre things like live chickens because they were poultry and poultry was a thing you could ship. They even mailed a 6-foot
Mm,
alligator, a
mm-mm.
whole alligator, presumably in a crate. I couldn't find out. And a man in New York decided to mail a crate of live bees.
Not the crate of live bees. Why?
Literally bees. He sent it with a note for the carrier that said, "Watch out for the bees." Very nice of him. But my personal favorite, a man in Utah decided to mail his wife's wedding ring to her mother to be repaired. But he didn't send it in a package. He mailed the ring inside a hollow out potato.
So here's what I'm thinking, right? If you don't hollow out the potato and you instead create a little cavity inside the potato for the ring, does the potato then serve as like protection for the ring? Because if that's the case, then even more so, why would you hollow out the potato for this? And then also, how do you address it? Did they carve the address into the potato? Because that's the only way that the mail carrier is going to like open his bag and like reach in and grab a potato.
Yeah.
Was it just like a raw dogged potato? Was it in a bag? I have questions. Anyway,
And really, what's so fascinating about all of these stories is it tells us a lot about public trust. It really does sound so reckless to us now, but for them, the post office was the most reliable and in many ways the safest mode of transportation. The roads, they were terrible. Private rail and stagecoaches, those were expensive and dangerous. But the postal carriers, they were part of the community. They were the person that brought you the good news and the bad news. They were the face that you knew and trusted.
so the post office became this trusted and like almost sacred institution. People trusted it with their lives and apparently with the lives of their children. It wasn't just a government service, it was a lifeline. It was a community. It was a symbol of dependability.
Absolutely. And the anecdotes, as wild as they are, prove a fundamental point. The American people, through their grassroots advocacy, had created an institution that they trusted more than anything else. It was an institution that delivered more than letters and packages. It delivered a level of faith in public service that is almost unimaginable today.
It makes you wonder, in a world where we're so polarized like today and trust in public institutions is at an all-time low, do you think we could ever get back to this?
Ooh, big question. And even if we could get back to that point, I don't know if we should. But the story of parcel posts and the people who used it reminds us of the power of that trust and what a public institution can become when it's truly a tool for the people.
Act 4, The Political Postmaster. So, we've been talking about the post office as a wild, weird, and wonderful delivery service. A place that you could mail a baby or a beehive for some reason. But for a lot of people, especially in the segregated South, the post office was something else entirely. It was a site of political and social power, a place that symbolized respect and, for some, the slow, hard won fight for equality.
We've seen how the post office became a tool for people to participate in the economy, but it was also a battlefield for civil rights. The story we're about to tell is about a woman who used her position in a public institution to stand up to an entire town. Her name was Minnie M. Cox.
And Minnie M. Cox was no ordinary person. She was a total rarity for her time, a college educated black woman born in Mississippi in 1869, just 4 years after the Civil War ended. She and her husband were wealthy landowners and business owners. They were also active in the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln. At the time, federal jobs were often given through a patronage system, a reward for party loyalty. Minnie and her family were influential black Republicans in a region that was politically dominated by white Democrats.
And a quick note on parties, and actually, Maya's other podcast, Well I Laughed, has an incredible episode on the history of political parties, and we'll link in the show notes below. But in Minnie's era, Republicans were the party of Lincoln, Reconstruction, and, in theory, black civil rights. Southern Democrats dominated the Jim Crow South and defended segregation. Over the 20th century, through the New Deal realignment, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and Nixon's Southern strategy, those coalitions fundamentally shifted. The party labels stayed the same, but the regional bases, racial coalitions, and stances on federal power versus states' rights were essentially reversed. So when we talk about Republicans or Democrats in the early 1900s versus today, we are talking about very different political coalitions.
So Minnie M. Cox's appointment as postmaster of Indianola, Mississippi in 1891 was no accident. She was qualified, she was respected, and her family had earned the position through their hard work and political activism. She was only 22 years old when she got this job. Imagine that kind of responsibility and visibility at such a young age.
To understand her story, we have to rewind a bit and talk about what came before her. During Reconstruction, and that's roughly 1865 to 1877, the period right after the Civil War, the federal government sent troops to the South to enforce the rights of newly freed Black Americans. This was a direct, powerful expansion of federal authority. And one of the ways it's made its presence known was through public institutions. The post office was a key one.
For the first time, the federal government began to appoint black citizens to positions of power in the South, as tax collectors, federal judges, and most visibly as postmasters. In fact, more than 200 African Americans are known to have served as postmaster prior to 1900. The post office wasn't just a place to get a letter, it was the most prominent federal building in a small town. Its employees were federal agents.
In towns where the sheriff, the mayor, and the courts enforced Jim Crow, the post office was often the only visible foothold of federal power. For Black residents, it could be a rare site of protection and dignity. A building that answered to Washington, not to local bosses. The postmaster was a respected figure in a community hub, handling not just letters, but money orders, savings, and business correspondence. And the salary was a living wage by local standards, an economic foothold that was otherwise denied under segregation.
This gave black citizens a level of economic stability and social standing that was practically unheard of. A black postmaster was not just a symbol of hope. They were the real deal, a living, breathing testament to the promises of Reconstruction.
But here's where things start to unravel. One domino tipped the next. Lincoln's assassination in April 1865 put Andrew Johnson in charge. His lenient Reconstruction let ex-Confederate power snap back and pass black codes. That sparked radical Reconstruction, which lasted from about 1867 to 1877. But the backlash led to the Compromise of 1877, when federal troops were withdrawn from the South in exchange for settling a disputed presidential election. With the troops gone and the federal protections removed, the final domino fell. Redemption, a white supremacist counter-revolution.
So by the time Minnie became postmaster in 1891, we're 14 years past the end of Reconstruction. The white supremacist backlash is in full swing. They used voter suppression laws, poll taxes, literacy tests, grandfather clauses, white primaries, and more to strip away black political power. In 1896, 5 years into Minnie's tenure, Plessy v. Ferguson stamped, quote, separate but equal into law, green-lighting a new wave of Jim Crow segregation. And beyond the statutes, there was the constant threat of violence: night riders, red shirts, lynch mobs, intimidation that enforced white supremacy when the courthouse didn't.
So, in this brutal reality, Minnie M. Cox was a living reminder of the promises of Reconstruction, even though her appointment came after Reconstruction ended. First in 1891, then when she was reappointed in 1897, and by the early 1900s, that promise was being violently dismantled. Her very presence in a position of federal authority cut against the new order. The post office was still a federal building, and she was still a federal employee, a visible piece of government that, on paper, claimed equal citizenship, now colliding with a town determined to erase it.
The town's backlash wasn't just a random act of bigotry. It was a predictable and brutal part of a much larger movement to dismantle any symbol of Black freedom and federal authority. And by 1902, that movement was reaching a fever pitch.
The federal troops of Reconstruction had long since left the South, and white resentment was boiling over. White supremacist politician James K. Vardaman was rising to power on a platform of white supremacy. He was angry that Black people held any kind of government jobs. He publicly singled out Minnie M. Cox as an example. It wasn't about her job performance. It was about her existence.
The threats started small, but then they escalated. You could feel the tension building in the town. In the fall of 1902, the threats became open and public. A local newspaper ran an article calling for her to be removed. Then a public meeting was held, and the mob issued an ultimatum: resign by January 1st, 1903, or face the consequences. I mean, can you imagine the terror of that? The feeling of an entire town turning against you, knowing that there's nowhere to go, no one to call?
I really can't imagine that. But Minnie M. Cox was a person of immense agency. She had every reason to leave, but she refused. She said she would not resign, that her term wasn't up. She wrote a letter directly to President Theodore Roosevelt detailing these threats.
And Roosevelt's response was a complete and total power move. He was a man who believed in a strong federal government, and he saw the mob's actions not just as a racist attack on a person, but as a direct challenge to the United States itself. He sent a public message making it clear he would not accept her resignation. He told the Senate he would, quote, not take a single step backward from the position he had taken. Honestly, power move.
Total power move. The white residents of Indianola were furious. They doubled down. And on January 2nd, 1903, the threats became so violent that Minnie and her husband were forced to flee for their lives. They had to abandon their home, their business, and everything they worked for. But Roosevelt, he didn't back down either. He sent a telegram ordering the Indianola post office to be closed indefinitely. He rerouted all of the town's mail to the neighboring community, 30 miles away. So, for months, the people of Indianola had to travel just to get their mail.
Honestly, shocking in its audacity. You wanted to get rid of the Black Postmaster? Fine. You can get rid of the whole damn post office. It's a perfect example of a public institution being used as a tool to stand up for civil rights. Roosevelt was willing to inconvenience an entire town just to make a point that a citizen's right to a federal job and a citizen's right to safety would not be violated.
His actions weren't just a political stunt. They were a direct projection of federal authority into a place that was trying to reestablish the old racist order. For Roosevelt, the post office was more than a mail service. It was a symbol of national unity and federal power. He was telling the South, in no uncertain terms, that the federal government had a role to play in protecting its citizens, a role that had been neglected since the end of Reconstruction.
He used this crisis to remind the country that public institutions are not just for convenience. They can be a bulwark against injustice. His defense of Minnie Cox's position was a testament to the idea that a public job, earned on merit, was worth protecting no matter the cost.
The story of Minnie M. Cox doesn't end there. The post office remained closed until her term officially ended in January 1904. Minnie had made it clear during that crisis that she would not seek reappointment. She refused to be pushed out early, and she also knew that she couldn't safely continue. Roosevelt then appointed a white postmaster, William Martin, who was actually a friend of the Coxes. Minnie and her husband came back to Indianola later in 1904 and founded Delta Penny Savings Bank, among the first Black owned banks in Mississippi. She shifted from public office to building financial infrastructure for her community, turning a federal position into lasting local power.
Her story is a testament to the resilience of a people who, despite incredible odds, used every tool at their disposal. From a postmaster's job to a national bank, to build a new life for themselves. It's a reminder that the post office, in all of its complexity, was a vital front in the ongoing fight for civil rights.
Act 5. The battle continues.
So, we've covered a lot of ground today. Farmers organizing in grange halls, demanding connection, rural free delivery transforming the countryside, parcel post opening the door to a consumer revolution, and Minnie M. Cox standing her ground against an entire town determined to erase her.
But here's what connects all of those stories. They're all about the same fight. Who gets access? Who gets left behind? And who profits from the infrastructure that we all depend on?
Because that fight didn't end in 1913. It's still happening right now. The post office still has its universal service obligation, a legal duty to deliver to every single address in the country, no matter how remote or unprofitable. It's the same promise those farmers fought for over a century ago.
Except now, the post office is caught in an impossible bind. And it's a trap we set for them. Since 1982, there's been no regular taxpayer funding for day-to-day operations. None. Stamps and shipping fees pay the bills. That's it. The post office has to operate like a business while fulfilling a public mission that no business would ever take on, reaching every address in America, whether it's profitable or not.
So let's be clear about how absurd this is for a second. We don't ask the fire department to turn a profit. We don't demand that public schools compete with private academies on price while serving every child. Well, we didn't used to, but we've handcuffed the post office with a business model designed to fail, and then we act surprised when it struggles.
And just like in 1900, private companies have figured out exactly how to exploit that impossible mandate. Picture a delivery route in a dense suburb today. Houses packed tight, paved roads, a dozen packages dropped in a minute. Fast, efficient, it's profitable. That's where UPS, FedEx, and Amazon make their money.
Now, follow that same driver out to rural Montana. Houses are miles apart. The roads are made of dirt. Weather can turn routes into obstacle courses. And delivery that takes 30 seconds in the suburbs can take 30 minutes or more in the countryside.
So, what do private companies do? They cherry pick the profitable routes and dump the rest on the post office. It's called last mile delivery, the final, most expensive leg of the journey. And it's because of universal service, the post office has to take every package and deliver it. No surcharges, no, sorry, it's not worth our time. Every single address.
On a typical day, the post office finishes around 10 million last mile packages for other companies. 10 million. That means FedEx or UPS drops a package at a postal facility, and the post office takes it the rest of the way, doing the hard and expensive work while the private company collects the shipping fee.
And get this, there are more than 1 million new addresses added every year. 1 million more stops the post office has to make. So while mail volume, yes, decreases, the cost of maintaining universal service keeps climbing. But here's what nobody wants to say out loud. It's only not sustainable because we're refusing to fund it.
And here's the kicker, because while the post office is doing all of this work, The same companies that depend on it are actively trying to weaken it. UPS lobbies regulators to force the post office to raise parcel prices, even as UPS still hands off its thin routes to the post office. FedEx's founder has publicly suggested that privatizing or even closing the post office should be, quote, on the table.
Think about that. They want to dismantle the very institution that makes their business model work. Because if the post office disappears, who do you think will get to set the prices for rule free delivery? Who decides whether your grandmother in Montana gets her medication? Or whether a small business in Alabama can afford to ship their products?
And then there's Amazon. Before 2013, the post office only delivered on Sundays if you paid for expensive priority mail express service. But Amazon wanted cheap Sunday delivery for their customers without charging extra fees. So, in 2013, they cut a deal. The post office would start delivering packages on Sundays, initially an exclusive arrangement with Amazon, and suddenly postal carriers were working for a seventh day. And on those Sundays, they were delivering almost exclusively Amazon packages. But here's the problem. Adding an extra day of operations costs money. You need more staff, more vehicles running, more fuel, more overtime. The Postal Service's own Inspector General found that rolling this out nationwide created operational inefficiencies and extra costs that the post office had to absorb. And remember, and I'm sorry for continuously having to say this, but the post office gets zero tax dollars for daily operations. It had to cover all these new Sunday costs out of the revenue from the packages themselves.
And when politicians pushed the post office to raise parcel prices to cover costs, Amazon helped form the Package Coalition to lobby against those hikes, not to protect public service, but to protect Amazon's bottom line. And now Amazon is building out its own rule network, pulling the profitable volume in house while still leaning on the post office for P.O. boxes, island military addresses, and the far flung last miles that don't pad their margins.
Same game, public investment, private profit. Except now we're expecting the post office to subsidize billion-dollar corporations without giving it a dime of public funding.
And the narrative around all of this is toxic. They're trying to convince people that if something doesn't make a profit, it's broken. That if a public service loses money, it should be cut or privatized. But that's not how public goods work. The post office loses money the same way the fire department loses money, the same way that public schools lose money because they're not supposed to make money, they're supposed to serve people.
You don't ask if a fire department is profitable. You ask if it shows up when your house is on fire. The post office has always been there, delivering medicine to rural Alaska, carrying ballots in every election, reaching military bases overseas, and communities that private companies won't touch because the math doesn't work.
And we need to stop pretending the solution is to make it run better or to be more efficient. The solution is to fund it, to treat it like the public institution it is, to say out loud that universal service costs money, and that's okay because some things are worth paying for.
Those farmers who lined up in Grange halls in the 1890s understood something we've forgotten. Connection is not a luxury, it's a right. And rights cost money. They require collective investment, not just market forces and good vibes.
If only it could go off good vibes, we'd be good, yeah?
Oh man. Yeah. Like assign the post office an astrology sign. I feel like that'll get somebody on board.
I mean, I'm a Capricorn. I think they're a Capricorn. They work hard.
That feels right.
The farmers didn't ask the post office to break even. They demanded it reach them. They didn't care if it was profitable to deliver mail to a farm 7 miles outside of town. They said, we're citizens and we deserve this. And you know what? The government listened. It funded rural-free delivery. It built roads. It hired carriers. It made the investment because it was the right thing to do. And because people demanded it.
But they only work if we protect them, if we refuse to let them be dismantled by people who profit from their failure. The post office didn't appear out of nowhere. It was built by people who refused to accept isolation and exploitation as inevitable. People who organized, people who petitioned, who flooded Congress with demands until politicians had no choice but to listen.
And that's what it takes now. Not just defending the post office, but demanding more for it. Demanding funding. Demanding respect. Demanding that our government stop sabotaging a service that keeps this country connected. Because right now, the post office is bleeding while private companies extract value. Right now, there are proposals to cut service, close facilities, and treat universal access like an outdated luxury instead of a democratic necessity.
But here's what history tells us: we've won this fight before. Those farmers won rural free delivery. Workers won parcel post. Minnie M. Cox forced a president to defend federal authority. They didn't win by asking nicely, they won by organizing and by refusing to back down. They won by making politicians more afraid of losing their votes than losing corporate donations.
So the question isn't whether the post office matters. We know it does. The question is, are we willing to fight for it? Are we willing to demand that connection is a right and not something to be auctioned off to the highest bidder? Are we willing to say that some things should serve all people, not just profitable people, and then actually fund them?
Next episode, we're going airborne. The post office didn't just revolutionize ground transportation, it literally helped launch American aviation. We're talking about pilots flying open cockpit planes through blizzards, delivering mail by parachute, and an industry that wouldn't exist without federal contracts.
It's cowboys of the sky, corporate subsidies dressed up as innovation, and the moment the post office went from horses to airplanes. And you're not going to want to miss it.
This is People of Agency.
Thank you for listening to People of Agency. The institutions are messy, the people in them are complicated, and the fight over who they serve has never ended.
If you appreciate what we're doing here, digging into uncomfortable complexity instead of easy answers, leave us a review. Please share this episode with a friend. It's the best way for people to find small podcasts like ours. Find us on social media at people_of_agency.
Thank you for your support, because telling honest history, that's how we build better institutions.
People of Agency is created and written by Aileen Day with additional writing by Maia Warner-Langenbahn. It is hosted by Aileen Day and Maia Warner-Langenbahn.
This episode was edited by the amazing Kelsey Ruppersberg Day. Our beautiful cover art is by Sam Woodring. We have extensive sources for all of our episode linked in the show notes. Thank you to the post office for being the post office and having an incredible story to tell. Support your local post office by using postal services regularly. Mail a birthday card. Send your long-distance friend a piece of mail just for fun. There's no feeling like getting a piece of personal mail.